The wind howled across the endless steppe, carrying with it whispers of destiny yet to be written. Under the cold, star-streaked sky of Mongolia, a child was born into a world where only the ruthless survived. His cry echoed across the plains like a war horn, a sound that would one day shake empires. No one knew then this child would become a storm the world had never seen. The tribes of the steppe lived in blood and betrayal, bound by loyalty that shattered as quickly as it formed. The land was harsh, winters that could freeze bones, summers that could burn skin. Only warriors thrived here. Only predators ruled. And in this brutal cradle, legends were not born. They were forged in pain. A single life, fragile yet burning with fire, would soon become the center of it all. His name would be whispered with fear and awe. Temujin entered the world as the son of a tribal chief, but privilege meant little in the steppe. Power was borrowed, not owned. His father, a proud leader, held the loyalty of men who would turn against him in an instant. Temujin's first lessons were not of warmth, but of survival. His mother's eyes held a silent strength, the kind only those who had seen too much could carry. As a child, Temujin learned to read the sky like a book. Every wind, every silence was a warning. He watched men smile in daylight and plot murder under the stars. The steppe taught him early. Trust no one. His tribe rode with steel in their hands and fear in their hearts. One wrong move meant death. He grew up among wolves, both the four-legged and the two-legged kind. A horse was not a luxury. It was an extension of one's soul. As Temujin learned to ride, he also learned to fight. Not with glory, but with necessity. The bowstring bit into his young fingers. Pain became his silent companion. At night, he listened to stories of ancestors, men who conquered mountains and fell by betrayal. He didn't dream of being like them. He dreamed of surpassing them. His brothers were rivals as much as they were blood. Hunger, cold, and fear were constant teachers. In the steppe, mercy was weakness. And Temujin vowed he would never be weak. It began with a betrayal. His father was poisoned not on the battlefield, but during a feast. Temujin's world shattered overnight. The tribe turned their backs on him, abandoning his family to the mercy of the cold. But mercy was nowhere to be found. At barely 9 years old, Temujin was exiled into a life where death waited behind every rock. He starved. He froze, but he never bowed. His mother held their family together with nothing but sheer will. Temujin watched the men who had eaten at their table steal everything they owned. Hatred burned into his bones like fire under ice. Every betrayal became a scar, and every scar a promise. As he grew, so did the fire inside him. He hunted with bare hands, fought with sharpened stones. When captured by rival tribes, he waited, silent, like a wolf in a cage. They underestimated the boy with the sharp eyes. One night, with blood on his wrists, he escaped his captors, leaving behind a trail of terror. The boy they abandoned was gone. In his place stood something far more dangerous. Temujin began to gather allies, not through kindness, but through fear, loyalty, and vision. He spoke of uniting the tribes, not as a dreamer, but as a hunter who had chosen his prey. The steppe had never known unity. It was a land of endless blood feuds. But Temujin saw power in what others dismissed as chaos. He made alliances like a spider weaving a web, silent, deadly, calculated. Warriors followed him because they feared his enemies more than they feared him. He learned to read men, their greed, their fear, their weakness. He used all of it like weapons. One by one, the tribes that had once mocked his name began to kneel. Not out of love, but out of survival. Temujin was no longer a boy fighting to live. He was a man who decided who would live. He promised warriors glory, but gave them discipline. He punished betrayal with brutality. His army didn't march like others. It moved like wind, struck like thunder. Every battle was a test. Every victory, A warning. Rumors spread like wildfire. A storm was rising in the east. Even his enemies spoke his name in whispers. His banner, the black standard, became a symbol of inevitable death. Temujin had no throne, no castle, no crown. His empire lived on the backs of horses and the edge of blades. And yet, his power grew faster than any kingdom built of stone. The tribes had given birth to their conqueror. At night, Temujin stood alone beneath the stars, not as a king, but as a man who saw his destiny etched in the sky. The faces of the dead haunted him, but their whispers fueled him. He was not chasing power. He was becoming it. Those who opposed him would not merely be defeated. They would be erased. His warriors had stopped calling him by his childhood name. A new title echoed across the steppes, one that froze blood and ignited fear. Genghis Khan. It meant universal ruler. But to his enemies, it meant something darker. The boy who once starved in the cold now held the fate of nations in his hands. And this was only the beginning. The dawn broke crimson over the Mongolian plains, as if the sky itself had bled. Smoke curled upward in the distance. War drums pulsed like a second heartbeat. Genghis Khan sat silent on his horse, the wind brushing against his battle-worn face. Around him, thousands of warriors knelt, their eyes locked on the man who had risen from nothing. He didn't need to shout to command them. His silence was enough. Years of starvation and betrayal had hardened him into iron. Every scar was a memory, every battle a promise kept. The tribes he once feared now awaited his orders like shadows awaiting the storm. The boy Temujin was gone. What stood here was a force that could not be contained. Across the steppes, rival Khans whispered his name in fear, praying it would not be their turn next. He had united clans that had hated one another for generations. But unity, forged in blood, was not peace. It was a warning. Genghis did not believe in peace. He believed in dominance. Before him lay the tribes who still resisted his rule, proud, arrogant, unwilling to kneel. And to him, they were not rivals. They were prey. He raised his arm, not to speak, but to begin. The black banners of war unfurled, snapping in the wind like the wings of ravens. The drums roared louder, and the world held its breath. Genghis Khan whispered only 4 words to his generals. Leave none who resist. His first campaign as a true Khan was not a battle. It was a cleansing. He moved fast, faster than any enemy could imagine. His cavalry struck like lightning, splitting through defenses before they could even raise their blades. The rival tribes expected an army. What they faced was a storm. His warriors didn't just fight, they hunted. Every movement was planned. Every strike precise. The steppes echoed with the screams of chieftains who once mocked him. Their banners burned. Their people knelt. Their legacies turned to ash. Genghis Khan rode through the smoke, his eyes cold as steel. He spared no one who defied him. He rewarded those who bent the knee quickly. Loyalty bought survival. Hesitation bought death. His empire was not built on negotiations. It was built on fear. Captured warriors were given a choice. Serve or perish. Entire tribes joined his ranks overnight, swelling his forces like a river in flood. The more he conquered, the faster his legend grew. This steppe had never seen unity like this, not under a banner, but under a single will. With every victory, Genghis's army became less of an army and more of a force of nature. And nature answers to no man. Power invites betrayal, like fire draws moths. Some Khans bowed in daylight, but plotted at night. Genghis knew their smiles were masks, and he had no tolerance for masks. One by one, the traitors were exposed. Some confessed under the crushing silence of his gaze alone. Others resisted and disappeared. His justice was swift and brutal, but it wasn't rage. It was strategy. He understood that fear was sharper than any sword. Around the central fire, Genghis summoned his most loyal commanders. Men who had bled with him. Men who would follow him into the void. He cut his palm and held it to the flames. One by one, the commanders did the same. The blood hissed as it met the fire. They swore an oath, not of loyalty, but of destiny. To break that oath was to die. That night, beneath a sky black as iron, the foundation of the Mongol Empire was sealed. Not with parchment, but with blood. To conquer, brute strength was not enough. Genghis built something greater, a system. His warriors were trained like no other army on earth. They moved in silence, struck with precision, vanished like smoke. Each man carried multiple horses, rotating them for endless speed. They learned to fight without supply lines, to live off the land, move faster than thought. Orders traveled through signals, drums, and fire. They communicated across miles as if they were one body, one blade. His generals were chosen for merit, not bloodline. A stable boy could become a commander if he proved himself. It shattered centuries of tribal tradition, and it made his army terrifyingly efficient. When Genghis looked upon his men, he did not see soldiers. He saw instruments of fate. Their eyes were sharp, their hearts colder than winter wind. He molded them into the storm he had always been destined to unleash. Empires to the west were still laughing, unaware their laughter would soon choke in their throats. One night, as campfires burned bright against the black horizon, Genghis stood alone. The stars above were countless, but so were his ambitions. He had conquered the steppes. Now he hungered for the world beyond them. Every breath of wind carried whispers of empires, rich, soft, unprepared. And Genghis Khan smiled. Because storms do not stop at borders. The steppes had fallen silent. For the first time in history, they were united under one man. Genghis Khan sat atop a black horse, staring beyond the endless horizon. He had conquered tribes, but tribes were never his destiny. He hungered for kingdoms. His eyes fixed on the east, the walls of Jin dynasty loomed beyond the mountains. To the world! China was untouchable. To Genghis Khan, no wall was high enough. His scouts returned with reports of riches beyond imagination. Silks, gold, spices, and an empire that believed nomads were beneath them. That arrogance would be their undoing. Genghis gathered his generals beneath a moonless sky. Maps burned in the firelight as his finger traced the path to conquest. He did not shout. He did not boast. He simply said, "We ride east." Thousands of horsemen prepared without hesitation. His army moved not like men, but like wind. Across rivers, through blizzards, through silence. Behind them, the steppes whispered farewell to their storm. Ahead of them, China slept. The first fortresses appeared like distant teeth against the sky. The Great Wall, vast, ancient, proud, was not a barrier. It was a challenge. Genghis studied it, not with awe, but with calculation. Walls were built by men, and anything built by men could be broken. His army encircled border towns like wolves around a campfire. His archers rained death from beyond the enemy's reach. Soldiers behind the walls watched in horror as the Mongols never stopped moving. They attacked at night, at dawn, at moments no sane army would fight. Their horses galloped silently, hooves wrapped in cloth. Their arrows struck before the sound of their charge. Fear crept over the walls faster than arrows did. One fortress fell, then another. Genghis did not celebrate. He advanced. The Great Wall was pierced not by brute force, but by relentless will. Every victory fed the next. Towns that resisted burned. Towns that surrendered were spared. The choice was clear, and it spread like wildfire. Even those who hated him began to whisper his name with a trembling respect. The Middle Kingdom was waking up to a nightmare. In the imperial courts of the Jin dynasty, ministers laughed at the idea of defeat. "Nomads cannot breach our walls," they said. By the time the laughter stopped, the gates were already. Genghis' strategy was unlike anything they had seen. He starved cities instead of storming them. He cut off trade, poisoned rivers, turned their own land against them. Weeks turned into months. Fortresses that were supposed to last years crumbled from hunger and fear. The Jin soldiers expected honor in battle. Genghis offered none. He didn't care for honor. Only results. One general after another fell. Entire armies surrendered without a single sword drawn. His cavalry swept across the plains like locusts. Cities that resisted disappeared from the map. Refugees spoke of a black wind that killed everything in its path. That wind had a name. Genghis Khan. He was no longer just a conqueror. He was a myth being written in real time. By the time the imperial court realized their mistake, their empire was already bleeding out. And the storm didn't stop. Genghis Khan was not content with victory. He wanted dominion. Cities were burned with calculated cruelty to send a message. Those who surrendered were absorbed into his war. Machine, engineers, blacksmiths, merchants, they all became part of his empire. His generals rode at his side like extensions of his will. The empire expanded faster than any scribe could record it. He learned to use siege engines, stolen from conquered foes. Catapults, fire, projectiles, and brutal tactics were now part of the storm. The Mongols adapted faster than their enemies could react. Whole cities fell in a single night. Rumors spread of entire populations vanishing into the earth. The farther he rode, the weaker his enemies grew. The stronger his legend became. And legends do not stop for mercy. When Genghis rode through conquered lands, no songs were sung. Only silence followed his hooves. He stood at the walls of Jiangdu, once thought untouchable. The wind was cold, but his voice was colder. Tear it down. And the storm answered. China burned behind him, but Genghis Khan did not stop. The storm turned its eyes west, beyond the desert-like kingdoms that had never even spoken his name. They would learn it soon enough. His scouts returned with tales of rich cities, silk roads, and unsuspecting rulers. Genghis smiled the way storms smiled before lightning strikes. His army moved with the silence of death. Rivers froze under the hooves of his cavalry. Snowstorms bent to their march. Tribes who once mocked the Mongols now begged to join their ranks. Messengers carried warnings to distant courts. No one believed them. No one had ever seen an empire move like this. Genghis didn't march like a man seeking land. He moved like a force seeking dominion over breath itself. The trade route trembled. Merchant caravans disappeared without a sound. Fortress after fortress stood in their way. Fortress after fortress vanished. The storm had arrived in the west. West of the mountains, the Khwarezmian Empire flourished in wealth. Silk, gold, and arrogance filled its streets. Its ruler, Allah ad-Din Muhammad II of Khwarezm, believed no force could breach his lands. He was about to meet a man who didn't care for belief. Genghis sent a caravan merchants, not soldiers. It was a test, not a trade. The Shah had them executed, suspecting spies. The message returned in blood. Genghis Khan's rage was quiet, and quiet rage is the deadliest kind. He summoned his generals beneath a dark sky. The Shah has chosen war, he said. We will give him more than war! The Mongol army spread like fire over dry grass. Border cities fell within days. Panic swept the empire faster than the horses themselves. The Shah underestimated the Mongols. He believed his walls would save him. But walls mean nothing to storms. For every city he fortified, 10 more burned behind him. The Khwarezmian Empire was no longer a kingdom. It was prey. Bukhara was the first great jewel to fall. Its golden domes shimmered like a crown in the sun. The Mongols broke through its gates like they were made of straw. Genghis rode through the city not as a conqueror, but as a judgment. He stood in the great mosque, gazed at the trembling crowd, and whispered, I am the punishment of God. No army, no faith, no gold could shield them. Bukhara burned. Samarkand followed. A city that had stood for centuries collapsed in a week. The Shah's forces scattered like frightened birds. Genghis divided his army into swift, merciless columns. Each moved independently, striking where the enemy least expected. Supply lines were destroyed before they even existed. Bridges vanished overnight. Cities starved before they were attacked. The Mongols didn't need to siege. They made cities surrender to fear. Those who resisted died quickly. Those who surrendered lived. Under the shadow of the Khan, every victory fed the legend. Every legend fed the terror. The Shah fled, abandoning his people. Genghis pursued him not for vengeance but for completion. He wanted no survivors to dream of rebellion. Rivers turned red as fleeing armies were crushed. The empire that had mocked the Mongols was erased in months. The Shah died in exile, hunted like a wounded wolf. Genghis did not bother to speak his name again. His name no longer mattered. Only the lesson did. Kingdoms began to whisper of the Mongols as if they were a plague, not men. Travelers carried stories of horsemen who never tired, who never faltered. Cities prepared their walls, but not their hearts. Because walls can't stop whispers. And whispers become terror long before swords arrive. The West was no longer watching a conqueror. It was watching the birth of an unstoppable empire. The Silk Road now belonged to Genghis Khan. His armies stretched from the Pacific to the edge of Europe. The world had never seen a single man hold so much power. And still, his hunger was not satisfied. The storm had not ended. It had only grown darker. The storm had swallowed kingdoms whole. Genghis Khan stood at the edge of the world he had remade. From the deserts of China to the mountains of Persia, his banners cast shadows across continents. No empire had ever grown so fast. No ruler had ever commanded fear so absolute. Rivers bent to his armies. Kings bent to his will. Merchants paid tribute just to breathe. Kingdoms bowed before a name that needed no translation. But power was not enough for Genghis. Power had never been enough. He did not build walls. He tore them down. He did not seek peace. He hunted it. And now, with the East and West under his shadow, he turned his gaze south. The Western Shia kingdom had defied him once. He had not forgotten. Old oaths lingered like smoke. Genghis believed in no loose ends. His armies gathered once again like thunderclouds on the horizon. His sons stood beside him, each commanding legions forged in fire. The world braced itself for another storm. And the storm came. Western Shia had grown proud again, thinking the Khan's eyes were elsewhere. But Genghis never forgot defiance. His horsemen moved like ghosts through the desert, surrounding their kingdom in silence. By the time their spies reported the Mongol advance, it was already too late. Shia fortresses burned before their armies could rally. Cities that once sent tribute were dragged into the fire. Genghis spared no town, no general, no wall. The Shia ruler offered gold. Genghis answered with arrows. He had learned long ago, mercy invites weakness. The Mongols' siege engines shattered gates that had stood for centuries. Shia's last defenses crumbled like dust under the hooves of war. Smoke blackened the sky. Prisoners were lined up not for ransom, but for example. Word of their annihilation spread across kingdoms like a scream carried by the wind. Genghis Khan had no use for second chances. Shia fell completely. Not a corner left unclaimed. It was not conquest. It was erasure. The world took note. The storm did not fade with age. It grew sharper. With Shia gone, Genghis Khan turned to southern Song China. Rich lands, heavy cities, rivers full of trade and tribute. He knew it wouldn't fall like the steppes or Persia. But he had time. Time had always been on his side. His generals, once tribal warlords, were now masters of strategy. He no longer needed to lead every charge. His empire had become a machine that moved with or without him. But the Khan still rode with them. Not because he needed to, but because war was the only language he trusted. Along the great rivers, his armies built bridges faster than the enemy could destroy them. Towns surrendered at the sight of Mongol banners. Those who resisted disappeared into ash. He spared no fortress that challenged him. Even the mighty believed they were safe until they saw the Mongol horizon. And then they learned what it meant to live in a world owned by Genghis Khan. Emissaries begged for peace. Genghis accepted tribute, but never promises. He had no interest in words. Only obedience! The storm pressed further south. In 1227, Genghis Khan rode once more into Xia lands. Age had etched lines on his face, but not softened his heart. His body was scarred. His legend, untouchable. The campaign was brutal. His forces crushed every remnant of rebellion. But deep in the mountains, fate waited. One night, a wound caught up with him. Some say it was a fall from his horse. Others whisper of an assassin's blade. Some claim it was illness that finally dared touch the untouchable. No one knew for sure. And those who did were silenced forever. The Khan grew weak, but not broken. His generals continued to fight as if his will lived through their blades. The world did not know it yet, but the storm had reached its dusk. In the summer of 1227, the great Khan exhaled his last breath beneath the endless sky he had conquered. His death was kept secret. The empire could not afford weakness. His body vanished into legend, buried in a place no one would ever find. But storms don't die. They echo, and the echo of Genghis Khan still rides with the wind.